The day my mother abandoned me at Denver Airport changed everything. My name is Emma, and I was 16 when my mother left me stranded at Denver International Airport with nothing but $200 and a cold goodbye. I can still see her walking away without a single glance back, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor as she disappeared into the crowd with her new husband and his children. That moment at Gate C-37 didn't just break my heart. It shattered every assumption I had about family, love, and my place in the world. What I never could have imagined was how that devastating betrayal would become the catalyst for discovering the truth about my past and ultimately lead me to the family I was always meant to have. Before I tell you how I went from abandoned teenager to finding my real father and building the life I deserved, let me know where you're watching from and please hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to hear what happened when my mother returned from her luxury vacation to find my room completely empty and a letter that would change everything. Looking back, my childhood with my mother wasn't entirely unhappy, though the cracks were always there if you knew where to look. I remember Saturday mornings at Riverside Park in our old neighborhood in Phoenix, where she would push me on the swings with what seemed like genuine joy. Her laughter would ring out across the playground as I soared higher and higher, my stomach doing delicious flips with each arc through the desert air. On my 7th birthday, she spent hours in our cramped apartment kitchen making a lopsided chocolate cake from a box mix, decorating it with rainbow sprinkles and 7 mismatched candles she'd found in the junk drawer. We didn't have much money, but in those moments, it felt like we had everything that mattered. The shift began when I was 9 years old. I came home from Lincoln Elementary to find my parents sitting on opposite ends of our threadbare couch, the space between them feeling like a canyon. The afternoon light streaming through our thin curtains cast long shadows across their faces as they delivered the news that would reshape my world. They were getting divorced. The explanation was painfully generic. Sometimes adults stop loving each other, they said, leaving me with a hollow ache in my chest and 1,000 questions they couldn't or wouldn't answer. That night, I pressed my ear to my bedroom wall, listening to their muffled arguments through the thin drywall. My mother's voice was sharp and cutting, accusing my father of being a failure, of not providing the life she deserved. His responses were quieter, more defeated, talking about dreams deferred and promising things would get better. I clutched my stuffed elephant, Peanuts, as their voices rose and fell like an angry ocean, washing over me in waves of confusion and fear. The custody arrangement gave my mother primary custody, and my father quickly began to fade from my daily life. What started as every other weekend visits gradually dwindled to once a month, then to awkward phone calls that became increasingly brief and stilted. By the time I turned 12, he was little more than a signature on birthday cards that arrived sporadically and a fading collection of memories I wasn't even sure were real anymore. Life as a single-parent household in Phoenix was a constant struggle. My mother worked double shifts at Romano's Italian kitchen, waiting tables during the day and doing bookkeeping for the restaurant at night. I became a master of microwave dinners and homework supervision, letting myself into our apartment with the key I wore on a shoelace around my neck. The routine was exhausting but predictable. I knew what was expected of me, understood the unspoken rules of our survival, and never doubted that despite everything, I was the most important thing in my mother's world. Everything changed again when I was 14. My mother met Vincent at Romano's, where he was a regular customer who always requested her section. Vincent Blackstone was everything my father wasn't: successful, confident, and wealthy enough to leave $50 tips on $30 meals. I still remember the first time she mentioned him, her cheeks flushed with excitement as she described his expensive suits and the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating woman in the room. Their whirlwind romance progressed with breathtaking speed. Within 4 months, Vincent had proposed with a diamond ring so ostentatious it looked almost comical on my mother's work-worn hand. Before I had time to process the idea of having a stepfather, we were packing our meager belongings and moving into Vincent's sprawling mansion in Paradise Valley, complete with an infinity pool, wine cellar, and more marble surfaces than I could count. The house came with 3 permanent residents, Vincent's children from his first marriage. Isabella was 15, just a year older than me, with perfectly straightened blonde hair and a perpetual expression of barely concealed disdain for anyone she deemed beneath her social station. Trevor was 13, quiet and intense, who spent most of his time gaming in his elaborate bedroom setup and barely acknowledged my existence except to move past me in hallways. The youngest, Sophia, was 11 and initially seemed the most welcoming, offering to show me around the neighborhood and share her collection of horse figurines. That friendliness evaporated within days of our official move-in, replaced by the same cool distance her older siblings maintained. From the moment I crossed the threshold of that mansion, it became painfully clear that I was an unwelcome addition to an already established ecosystem. Vincent was polite but distant with me, reserving his genuine warmth and attention for his biological children. Family dinners became exercises in endurance as Vincent and my mother discussed private school enrollment for Isabella and Trevor, country club memberships, and vacation properties in Aspen and Martha's Vineyard. When I attempted to contribute to these conversations, sharing stories about my classes or books I was reading, I was met with polite nods before the discussion inevitably shifted back to Isabella's equestrian achievements or Trevor's computer programming competitions. What hurt most deeply was watching my mother transform before my eyes. The woman who had once clipped coupons religiously and shopped exclusively at discount stores now spoke knowledgeably about designer brands and 5-star restaurants. She began highlighting her hair, whitening her teeth, and referring to our previous life in Phoenix as her struggling years with an uncomfortable laugh whenever Vincent's affluent friends were around. It was as if she was systematically erasing the parts of herself that had created and nurtured me, replacing them with a version more suitable for her new role as Mrs. Vincent Blackstone. I tried desperately to find my place in this new family dynamic. I offered to help Isabella with her calculus homework, complimented Sophia's watercolor paintings, and attempted to engage Trevor in conversations about his video game interests. My efforts were met with polite tolerance at best and outright rejection at worst. The most painful memory was overhearing Isabella on a phone call with her friends, describing me as the baggage that came with Dad's midlife crisis wife. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow, and I spent that night crying silently into my pillow in the guest bedroom that had become my permanent residence. As spring approached, Vincent announced plans for the family's annual vacation to the Maldives. 2 weeks at an exclusive resort where they had stayed every year since his divorce. Despite the growing chasm between my mother and me, I felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this trip would provide the opportunity we needed to bond as a family, away from the pressures of school and Vincent's demanding work schedule. My optimism was quickly dampened when my mother took Isabella and Sophia shopping for new vacation wardrobes, failing to include me in the expedition. When I asked why I hadn't been invited, she casually mentioned that I had plenty of clothes already, despite the fact that most of my wardrobe consisted of hand-me-downs from our Phoenix days that looked shabby in comparison to the designer pieces the other girls wore. I ended up using money I'd saved from babysitting neighborhood kids to buy myself a modest black one-piece swimsuit, knowing it would pale in comparison to the collection of designer bikinis Isabella and Sophia would be bringing. A week before our departure, I overheard a conversation between my mother and Vincent that sent chills down my spine. They were in the master suite with the door slightly ajar, unaware that I was passing by on my way to the kitchen for a late-night snack. "What about arrangements for Emma?" Vincent's voice was low but clearly audible. "All taken care of," my mother replied with a dismissive tone that made my stomach clench with dread. "She won't be a problem." When I confronted her about it later, she brushed off my concerns with an airy wave of her manicured hand. "Just logistical details, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." The morning of our supposed departure arrived with the usual chaos of a family preparing for international travel. The house buzzed with activity as matching leather suitcases were loaded into Vincent's Range Rover, and last-minute items were gathered from various rooms throughout the mansion. I noticed that my passport wasn't among the stack of travel documents Vincent organized on the granite kitchen counter. But when I mentioned this discrepancy to my mother, she muttered something about having it safely in her purse and hurried me along to get ready. Looking back, the warning signs were impossible to miss. The way my mother avoided making direct eye contact with me during the drive to Denver International Airport. How no one discussed my seat assignment on the plane while debating who would get window seats and aisle access. The fact that my suitcase was noticeably smaller than everyone else's, containing what I now realize was just enough clothing for a few days rather than a 2-week vacation. But at 16, desperate to believe I was truly part of this new family configuration, I ignored the alarm bells ringing in my mind and chose hope over instinct. Denver International Airport on that Tuesday morning was a symphony of chaos. Travelers rushing between gates with rolling luggage, families saying emotional goodbyes, and the constant stream of announcements echoing through the soaring terminal spaces. Vincent navigated our group through the crowds with practiced efficiency, my mother at his side clutching her designer handbag like a shield. Isabella, Trevor, and Sophia followed close behind, their faces bright with the anticipation of another luxury vacation. I trailed at the back of our procession, struggling to keep up while managing my smaller suitcase and fighting a growing sense of unease. When we reached the check-in counter for our international flight, Vincent presented passports and confirmation details to the airline representative with the confidence of someone accustomed to first-class treatment. I watched with growing alarm as he handed over 5 passports, not 6. The knot in my stomach tightened as boarding passes were distributed to each family member except me. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward with my heart pounding. "I think you forgot my boarding pass." The airline representative looked confused, checking her computer screen with a furrowed brow. "I only show 5 passengers on this reservation." Vincent cleared his throat uncomfortably. Your mother needs to speak with you about that. We'll go ahead to security. As Vincent led the other children toward the security checkpoint with the luggage cart, my mother took my elbow and guided me to a quiet corner near a Hudson News store. Her face wore an expression I had never seen before, a strange mixture of detachment and mild annoyance, as if I were a problem to be solved rather than her daughter. Listen, Emma, she said, her voice unnaturally calm and measured. There's been a change of plans. You're not coming with us to the Maldives. The words hit me like a physical assault, knocking the breath from my lungs. What? Why? Did I do something wrong? She sighed, glancing over at Vincent and his children who were waiting by the security line, checking their phones and looking impatient. Vincent thinks this trip should be just for us and his kids. A chance to really bond as a family unit. But I am family too, I protested, my voice cracking with desperation. I'm your daughter. Don't make a scene, she hissed, digging frantically through her purse. She pulled out a small stack of 20s and pressed them into my trembling hand. Here's $200. You can figure it out. Just take an Uber home. I stared at the money in complete disbelief, the bills feeling surreal in my palm. You're leaving me at the airport alone. I don't even have a house key. She gave that casual shrug that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, a gesture so dismissive it seemed to erase my very existence. Mrs. Chen next door has our spare key. You'll be fine. You're mature for your age. Tears welled in my eyes as the full magnitude of what was happening crashed over me like a tsunami. Mom, please. You can't do this to me. Vincent is waiting, she said, glancing nervously toward the security checkpoint where her new family stood impatiently. This vacation is important for our future, Emma. Sometimes we all have to make sacrifices for the greater good. A sacrifice would be giving up a concert ticket or skipping a shopping trip, I said, anger finally breaking through my shock and disbelief. This is abandonment. This is choosing them over me. She flinched at the word abandonment but quickly composed herself, straightening her designer jacket. Don't be so dramatic. It's just 2 weeks. The refrigerator is fully stocked, and I left money for pizza delivery in the kitchen drawer. Before I could respond, she leaned in and planted a quick, dry kiss on my forehead, the kind of perfunctory gesture you might give a distant relative. I'll call you when we land in Mail. With that, she turned and walked away, her designer heels clicking against the airport tile as she rejoined Vincent and his children. I watched in stunned silence as they proceeded through security, my mother never once looking back to see if I was okay. Isabella caught my eye briefly through the glass partition and actually smirked before they disappeared from view, heading toward their gate and their luxury vacation. I stood rooted to that spot near the Hudson News for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the $200 clutched in my shaking hand. Around me, the airport continued its normal rhythm. Travelers rushing to catch flights, families embracing before departures, couples discussing dinner plans. But for me, time seemed suspended as the full weight of my mother's betrayal settled into my bones like a cold, permanent ache. The tears came without warning, hot and fast, streaming down my face as I sank onto a nearby bench. A few passers-by glanced at me with curiosity or mild concern, but no one stopped to help. In an airport, a crying teenager was just another piece of the landscape, easily overlooked and quickly forgotten. I spent the next several hours in a daze, watching the departure board as their flight status changed from boarding to departed. Each update felt like another twist of the knife in my chest. I tried calling my mother's cell phone repeatedly, but the calls went straight to voicemail. My desperate text messages showed as delivered but remained unanswered, creating a digital trail of my abandonment. Having fun at the airport yet? I finally texted, anger temporarily overwhelming my hurt. Hope abandoning your daughter was worth the first-class upgrade. No response came, which didn't surprise me. By now, my mother would be settling into her premium seat, perhaps sipping champagne and chatting with Vincent about the resort's amenities, relieved to have shed the burden of her previous life, including me. As afternoon stretched into evening, my situation became increasingly precarious. A TSA officer approached me as I sat in the food court, nursing a Coke I had bought to justify occupying the table for so long. "Everything okay, miss?" he asked, his expression mixing suspicion with genuine concern. "You've been here for quite a while." "I'm waiting for my ride," I lied, avoiding his probing gaze. "Traffic is really bad." He seemed unconvinced but nodded and moved on after advising me not to leave my bag unattended. I felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over me. How could I admit that my own mother had abandoned me like unwanted luggage? The words stuck in my throat, held back by a combination of shame and some lingering, irrational loyalty. As the evening crowds thinned and airport shops began closing their security gates, the reality of my situation became impossible to ignore. The $200 wouldn't last long, and even if I managed to get back to Vincent's house, I would be alone for 2 weeks with no transportation, limited food, and no emotional support system. I found myself in an airport bathroom, splashing cold water on my swollen face and trying to formulate some kind of plan. The girl in the mirror looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, abandoned, fundamentally changed from the person who had woken up that morning excited about a family vacation. In that moment, staring at my reflection under the harsh fluorescent lights, I understood that something fundamental had shifted. The invisible thread that had connected me to my mother, the basic trust that she would always protect me, had been severed completely. 7 hours had passed since my mother walked away. I had migrated from bench to bench throughout the terminal, watching families and couples embark on adventures together, each departure a reminder of my isolation. My phone battery was running dangerously low, adding another layer of anxiety to my already overwhelming situation. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, I made my way to a Chili's restaurant that was still serving food. I sat at the counter and ordered the cheapest item on the menu, a side of fries, trying to conserve my limited funds. The server, a kind-faced woman with graying temples and a name tag reading Maria, brought my food and then paused, studying my face with maternal concern. "You okay, honey?" she asked gently. "You look like you've been crying for hours." I attempted a smile that felt more like a grimace. "I'm fine, just a long day of travel." She didn't press further, but returned a few minutes later with a chocolate milkshake I hadn't ordered. "On the house," she said with a conspiratorial wink. "Whatever's going on, sugar and chocolate never hurt anyone." Her small act of kindness nearly undid me completely. I thanked her through the lump in my throat and ate slowly while scrolling through my phone contacts, looking for someone, anyone, who might be able to help me in this impossible situation. My list of options was depressingly short. Most of my friends from Phoenix had drifted away after our move to Paradise Valley, and I hadn't made any real connections at my new private school. I tried texting 2 of my mother's old friends from Romano's, women who had been part of our lives before Vincent entered the picture. One didn't respond at all, and the other replied with a brief message saying she was visiting family in California. It seemed that when my mother moved on to her new affluent life, her entire support network from our struggling years had been left behind as thoroughly as our old apartment and discount grocery shopping habits. As I scrolled through my contacts, feeling increasingly desperate, a name caught my eye that made my heart skip a beat. Dad. I hadn't spoken to my father in over 4 years. Our last conversation had been a brief, awkward phone call on my 13th birthday, filled with uncomfortable pauses and stilted pleasantries. After that, he seemed to vanish completely from my life. My mother had always implied that he wasn't interested in being a father, that he had moved on to bigger and better things that didn't include the complications of a daughter from his failed first marriage. "Your father has his own life now," she would say whenever I asked about him, her tone suggesting the topic was closed. Some men just aren't cut out for the responsibilities of parenthood. I stared at his contact information, my thumb hovering over the call button like it was connected to an explosive device. What if he rejected me too? What if my mother had been telling the truth all these years, and he genuinely wanted nothing to do with me? The thought of experiencing another abandonment in the same day felt unbearable, like it might actually break whatever was left of my spirit. I retreated to the airport bathroom, locking myself in a handicapped stall for privacy. I practiced different opening lines under my breath, trying to find words that wouldn't sound desperate or pathetic. "Hi, Dad, it's Emma. I know it's been a while, but..." No, too casual. "Hello, this is Emma. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm in serious trouble." Better, but still not right. In the end, desperation won out over pride and fear. With trembling fingers that felt disconnected from my body, I pressed the call button and held my breath as the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up and accept defeat when a deep, familiar voice answered. "Hello." The sound of his voice, so much like I remembered yet strange after years of silence, momentarily robbed me of speech. "Hello. Is anyone there?" he asked again, and I could hear genuine concern creeping into his tone. "Dad," I finally managed, my voice small and uncertain. There was a pause that felt like an eternity, then, "Emma? Is that really you, sweetheart?" The immediate warmth and concern in his voice cracked something deep inside my chest. "Dad, I need help," I said, and then the entire story came pouring out in a rush of words punctuated by sobs I couldn't control. The remarriage, the move to Paradise Valley, the airport, the $200, my mother's casual abandonment. By the end of my explanation, I was barely coherent, hiccuping through tears. She left you alone at the airport. His voice had changed, taking on a hard edge that replaced the initial shock. Where are you right now? I told him, half expecting him to offer to call a social services agency or maybe wire me money for a hotel room until he could figure out a more permanent solution. Stay exactly where you are, he said firmly. I'm coming to get you myself. I was planning to drive down, which would take me about an hour and a half from Boulder, but let me see if I can arrange something faster. Can you stay safe until then? You're coming here? I asked, disbelief evident in my voice. You don't have to do that. Maybe you could just help me figure out how to get home. Emma, he interrupted, and his voice carried a weight of emotion that took my breath away. I'm coming to get you. Find the customer service desk for whatever airline your mother was supposed to be flying with. Tell them exactly what happened. I'll call ahead and make sure they take care of you until I arrive. After he hung up, I sat in that bathroom stall for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My father, the man I had been told wanted nothing to do with me, was dropping everything to come rescue me. He had initially planned to drive the hour and a half from Boulder, but now he was arranging something faster. Nevertheless, I followed his instructions, approaching the customer service desk with my heart hammering against my ribs. To my amazement, the airline staff were immediately sympathetic and helpful. They escorted me to a private waiting area reserved for unaccompanied minors, brought me a sandwich and orange juice, and assured me they would monitor my situation until my father arrived. Unfortunately, this happens more often than you'd think, the customer service manager told me quietly, her voice filled with professional compassion. Parents changing travel plans at the last minute and leaving children to figure things out on their own. The wait felt both endless and surreal. I wasn't sure if it would be 90 minutes by car or however long it would take him to arrange alternative transportation. I drifted between hope, fear, and complete emotional exhaustion. What if my father didn't show up? What if he did show up but resented having to rescue me from my mother's mess? What if this was all an elaborate setup for another, even more devastating rejection? My mind wandered to the few clear memories I retained of him from before the divorce. Teaching me to ride a bicycle in Steel Indian School Park, his steady hand on the seat as I wobbled forward on training wheels. Reading bedtime stories in different voices for each character, making me giggle with his exaggerated accents. A Christmas morning when I was 6 and he had surprised me with a dollhouse he'd built himself, his face lighting up with pure joy at my delighted reaction. If those memories were real, if he had truly loved me then, why had he disappeared from my life so completely? Why had he never fought harder to maintain contact? The question swirled through my exhausted mind as the minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Just as I was beginning to doze off in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, a voice came over the PA system. "Attention, please. Will Emma Martinez please report to the information desk? Emma Martinez to the information desk, please." My heart leaped into my throat as I gathered my small suitcase and followed an airline employee through a series of corridors and security checkpoints. Instead of heading to the main terminal, however, we walked through what appeared to be a private aviation section of the airport. "Your father arranged to meet you here," the employee explained as we approached glass doors leading to the tarmac. That's when I saw it, a sleek private jet with stairs extending from its door, and walking down those stairs was a tall man in a business suit. Even from a distance, his profile was unmistakably familiar, though he looked different from my childhood memories. His dark hair was now streaked with silver at the temples, and he carried himself with a confidence and authority I didn't recall from my younger years. But his eyes, when they found mine across the tarmac, were exactly as I remembered: kind, intelligent, and crinkled at the corners. For a moment, we both froze, taking each other in across the distance and years of separation. Then he strode forward, closing the gap between us in long, determined steps. He stopped just short of embracing me, uncertainty written clearly across his features. "Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I can't believe it's really you." I didn't know what to say or how to act. Part of me wanted to throw myself into his arms like the little girl who used to greet him at the door after work. Another part, the wounded teenager who had felt abandoned by both parents, held back, protecting herself from potential disappointment. He seemed to sense my hesitation. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly, his voice carrying years of regret. "For everything. For not being there, for not fighting harder to stay in your life." Something in his sincerity and the obvious pain in his eyes broke through my defenses. The tears I thought had been exhausted hours earlier returned with fresh intensity. "She told me you didn't want to see me anymore," I choked out through my sobs. "That you had moved on to a new life." His face darkened with an expression I had never seen before, a combination of anger and profound sadness. "That was never true. Not for a single day, not for a single moment." He tentatively opened his arms, and this time I didn't hesitate. I stepped into his embrace and let out years of pent-up grief and confusion against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely paternal that I had almost forgotten. We stood like that for several minutes, both of us overcome with emotion and the surreal nature of our reunion. When we finally separated, he kept one protective arm around my shoulders as he guided me toward the waiting aircraft. "Let's get you out of here," he said gently. "We can talk properly once we're in the air." The interior of the private jet was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Plush leather seats arranged in conversation groups, polished wood surfaces, and soft lighting that created an atmosphere of quiet luxury. A flight attendant greeted us warmly and offered me a selection of drinks and gourmet snacks, treating me like a valued passenger rather than a rescued refugee. As we settled into seats facing each other and the plane prepared for takeoff, I couldn't help but stare at my father in wonder and confusion. "Is this your plane?" I asked. He smiled, a hint of embarrassment crossing his features. "The company's, technically. I'm the CEO of Mountain Peak Technologies now." "CEO?" I echoed in disbelief. My mother had always described him as barely scraping by financially, someone who couldn't even make consistent child support payments. "It's been a very successful few years," he said simply, then leaned forward with his expression growing serious. "Emma, I need you to understand something crucial. I've been trying to contact you for years. Birthday cards, Christmas gifts, phone calls, all of it blocked or returned. When your mother remarried and moved to Paradise Valley, I completely lost track of your whereabouts. I hired private investigators who couldn't locate your new address. I filed motions with the court that somehow got lost in bureaucratic delays. My mind reeled as the implications of what he was saying began to sink in. She kept you away from me on purpose. He nodded, pain evident in every line of his face. I've been sending child support and additional money every month since the divorce. Substantial amounts that you clearly never saw. I thought of the second-hand clothes, the times we had survived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, my mother's constant complaints about financial struggles and her inability to afford basic necessities. We were always broke, I whispered, the pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. She said you barely paid any child support at all. My father opened a leather briefcase and removed a thick folder, handing it to me with steady hands. Inside were copies of cashed checks, court documents, and records of attempted communications, all meticulously organized by date. The evidence of his consistent efforts and my mother's systematic deception was overwhelming and damning. I'm not showing you this to hurt you, he said gently, watching my face as I absorbed the documentation. But you deserve to know the truth about what's been happening all these years. As the plane took off, carrying me away from the airport where my mother had abandoned me, I felt strangely weightless, as if I were shedding years of lies and manipulations with each mile we traveled. My father explained that he now lived in Boulder, where he had built Mountain Peak Technologies from a small startup into a major player in renewable energy systems. The company had grown exponentially over the past 5 years, bringing him success and financial security he had never imagined possible. I kept your room ready, he said, a touch of embarrassment coloring his voice. All these years, just hoping that someday. The flight passed quickly as we began the delicate process of reconnecting. There were awkward pauses and moments of overwhelming emotion, but underneath it all was a current of genuine connection that felt both entirely new and comfortingly familiar. When we landed at Boulder Municipal Airport, a car was waiting to take us to his home. I pressed my face to the window as we drove through upscale neighborhoods before turning onto a private drive that wound up into the foothills. The house that came into view took my breath away, a stunning contemporary structure of glass and natural stone, perched on a hillside with sweeping views of the Rocky Mountains. "Home sweet home," my father said, watching my reaction with a mixture of pride and nervousness. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." A woman named Jennifer greeted us at the front door. I initially tensed, wondering if she was my father's wife, but he quickly introduced her as his executive assistant who had helped prepare for my unexpected arrival. "I've set up the Mountain View bedroom for Emma," she told my father efficiently. "Fresh linens, toiletries in the ensuite bathroom, and I stocked the kitchen with groceries for the next few days. The security system has been updated to include her access codes." My father thanked her, and she departed with a warm smile in my direction, leaving us alone in the spacious foyer. He then gave me a comprehensive tour of the house, each room more beautiful and thoughtfully designed than the last. There was a gourmet kitchen with professional-grade appliances, a library filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a home theater, and an office with views that would make concentration nearly impossible. When we reached what would be my bedroom, I stopped short in the doorway, completely overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness evident in every detail. The room was painted a soft sage green with enormous windows overlooking the mountain vista. A comfortable queen-sized bed dominated one wall, while a desk, bookshelf, and reading chair created a perfect study area by the window. But what caught my eye and stopped my heart was the collection of wrapped packages arranged carefully on the dresser. Are those? I moved closer, unable to complete the question. My father nodded, his expression tender and vulnerable. Birthday and Christmas presents. Every year since I lost contact with you. I couldn't deliver them, but I couldn't bear not to buy them either. Arranged chronologically were gifts appropriate for each age I had been, some still in their original wrapping paper, others in gift bags with tags written in my father's familiar handwriting. Beside them sat a leather photo album labeled simply Emma. With trembling hands, I opened it to discover what few photographs my father had managed to collect of me over the years. School pictures from my elementary years, a newspaper clipping of me receiving an academic award in 7th grade, and what appeared to be several long-distance photos of me leaving Paradise Valley Prep School. "You really did try to stay in my life," I whispered, the reality finally penetrating my defenses completely. "Every single day," he replied, his voice rough with years of suppressed emotion. "And I'm not going anywhere now, if you'll let me be your father again." That first night in my new home, we shared takeout from a local Thai restaurant, neither of us quite ready to tackle the complexity of cooking together. The conversation flowed more easily as physical and emotional exhaustion lowered my defensive walls and good food restored some of my depleted energy. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt truly seen and heard, my thoughts and feelings given genuine value and consideration rather than being dismissed or manipulated. As I finally crawled into the impossibly comfortable bed in my new room, surrounded by years' worth of unopened presents and evidence of my father's unwavering love, emotional and physical exhaustion finally overtook me. My last conscious thought before drifting off to sleep was that perhaps being abandoned at Denver International Airport wasn't the devastating ending I had feared, but rather the beginning I had always needed and deserved. I awoke the next morning momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar luxury of high thread count sheets and the sound of wind through pine trees outside my window. The events of the previous day came rushing back as I sat up, taking in my new surroundings in the clear morning light streaming through the panoramic windows. The mountain view from my bedroom was breathtaking, snow-capped peaks stretching to the horizon, their majesty making my problems feel both significant and somehow manageable at the same time. I ran my fingers over the soft comforter, marveling at the contrast between this sanctuary and the emotional poverty I had endured in Vincent's mansion despite all its material luxury. After showering in the ensuite bathroom, which featured a rainfall showerhead and more high-end toiletries than I had ever owned, I dressed in yesterday's clothes and ventured downstairs to explore my new home in daylight. I found my father in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes with limited success while classical music played softly from hidden speakers. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile that turned sheepish as he gestured to the misshapen pancake smoking in the professional-grade pan. "I thought I'd make breakfast, but it seems my cooking skills haven't improved much since you were little." A memory surfaced unbidden, Sunday mornings in our old Phoenix apartment when he would attempt pancakes while my mother slept in after her Saturday night shifts. They were always oddly shaped and sometimes slightly burned, but he served them with such pride and enthusiasm that I never had the heart to complain. "I remember your pancakes," I said, sliding onto a stool at the granite kitchen island. "You used to try to make them look like animals with the batter." His entire face lit up with joy and surprise. "You remember that? You were so young when your mother and I—" "Some things stick with you," I replied, accepting the plate he offered with hands that weren't quite steady. Despite their appearance, the pancakes tasted wonderful, or perhaps everything tasted better when it came with genuine love and attention. The simple normalcy of sharing breakfast helped ease the awkwardness that lingered between us after so many years of separation. After we ate, my father gave me a proper tour of the house and the surrounding property. The grounds were extensive, with carefully maintained native landscaping that blended seamlessly into the natural foothills environment. There was an outdoor kitchen and dining area, a hot tub positioned to take advantage of the mountain views, and walking trails that led into the wilderness areas beyond the property boundaries. "I have some people I'd like you to meet today," he said as we returned to the main living area, "if you feel up to it." An hour later, I found myself sitting across from a distinguished woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Patricia Hawkins, family law attorney. Her manner was professional but genuinely kind, and she explained the legal implications of my situation with clarity and compassion. "What your mother did constitutes child abandonment under Colorado law," she said, her tone matter-of-fact but gentle. "Leaving a minor without proper care arrangements or supervision is a serious offense. Additionally, there appears to be substantial financial misconduct regarding the child support payments your father has been making." I shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair. "I don't want to get my mom in legal trouble. I just want to be safe and have a stable home." "That's exactly what we want too," Patricia finished for me with understanding. "But we need to establish legal protections for you, especially if you wish to remain with your father long term." My father, who had been quietly listening from across the room, leaned forward in his chair. "Emma, the choice is ultimately yours to make, but I want you to know that I'm fully prepared to seek permanent custody if that's what you want." The idea was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. The possibility of having a real choice in my own life after so many years of feeling powerless. "Can I really choose?" I asked. "You're 16, Patricia explained. Colorado courts give significant weight to the preferences of minors your age, especially in cases involving abandonment, neglect, or documented parental misconduct." After the attorney left, my father showed me his home office, where he had meticulously documented every attempt to maintain contact with me over the years. Filing cabinets contained copies of court documents seeking visitation rights, records of phone calls to my mother that had gone unanswered, and even emails to my schools that had apparently never been forwarded to me. "She threatened legal action if I tried to contact you directly," he explained, showing me a cease and desist letter from Vincent's attorney dated 3 years earlier. "She claimed I was harassing her and causing you emotional distress by trying to maintain a relationship." Each revelation was another piece of the puzzle, completing a picture of deliberate and systematic separation that made my heart ache not just for myself, but for my father as well. Why would she do this? I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. Was it just to keep you away from me? My father sighed deeply, running his hands through his silver-streaked hair. I think it was more complicated than simple cruelty. After our divorce, your mother struggled financially while I was still building my career. When Mountain Peak really took off and my situation improved dramatically, it was probably easier for her to maintain the narrative that I was an uninvolved, deadbeat father than to explain why she had systematically kept us apart. 3 days after my arrival in Boulder, as I was beginning to settle into a tentative routine with my father, my mother finally called. I stared at her name on my phone screen, a hurricane of emotions rendering me temporarily paralyzed. "You don't have to answer," my father said gently, noticing my distress as we sat together in his study. After 6 rings, the call went to voicemail. A minute later, a notification appeared indicating she had left a message. With trembling fingers, I pressed play and put the phone on speaker so my father could hear. "Emma, honey, there seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding." My mother's voice emerged from the speaker, falsely bright and casual. "I thought you clearly understood that the plan was for you to stay home during our family trip. Vincent felt it would be good character building for you to have some independence, and I agreed it was a mature opportunity. I certainly didn't abandon you, sweetheart. That's such a harsh and dramatic word. Please call me back so we can clear up this confusion. The resort Wi-Fi is spotty, but I'll try to check messages regularly. Love you." The blatant rewriting of reality made my stomach churn with disgust and renewed anger. There had been no plan for me to stay home, no discussion of independence or character building. She had abandoned me without warning or preparation and was now attempting to gaslight me into doubting my own lived experience. "Classic manipulation," my father muttered, shaking his head with disgust. "She hasn't changed at all." I made the decision not to return the call. Instead, with the full support of Patricia Hawkins and my father, I chose to stay in Boulder permanently. The attorney began the formal process of filing for a change in custody, gathering evidence of my mother's abandonment and years of financial misconduct. With the immediate legal matters set in motion, my father turned his attention to practical concerns like rebuilding my life from scratch. "You'll need clothes, school supplies, whatever personal items you want from your old room," he said during breakfast the next morning. "We can make a shopping trip today if you feel up to it, and then plan a trip back to Paradise Valley to collect your belongings." The shopping expedition was surreal in the best possible way. Accustomed to thrift stores and clearance racks, I felt overwhelmed by my father's insistence that I choose whatever I liked without checking price tags or worrying about cost. By the end of the day, I had a completely new wardrobe, a top-of-the-line laptop for schoolwork, and an iPhone with unlimited data, a sharp contrast to the restricted prepaid plan my mother had grudgingly provided. That evening, sitting on the deck overlooking the mountain vista, my father and I had our first truly deep conversation about the divorce and the years of enforced separation. "Why did you and Mom really split up?" I asked, the question that had haunted me since childhood finally finding its voice. He was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. The simplest answer is that we wanted fundamentally different things from life. Your mother prioritized financial security and social status above almost everything else. When my first startup failed and we went through a rough financial period, she saw me as a failure and a liability rather than a partner facing temporary setbacks. "And you?" I prompted, genuinely curious about his perspective. I wanted a true partnership, someone who would weather the storms with me and believe in our ability to build something better together, not someone who would abandon ship at the first sign of rough seas. He looked directly at me, his eyes filled with old sadness. "Leaving you was never part of my plan, Emma. That was the hardest part of everything that followed. Your mother used her custody rights as a weapon, gradually restricting my access until I was effectively erased from your life." Over the following days, we made concrete plans for my future. My father contacted Boulder Preparatory Academy, one of Colorado's most prestigious private schools, and arranged for me to start when the fall semester began. He also connected me with Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist specializing in adolescent trauma and family dynamics, to help me process the abandonment and years of psychological manipulation. Slowly, I began to envision a life where I was genuinely valued and supported rather than merely tolerated as an inconvenience. 2 weeks after my arrival in Boulder, my father, Patricia, and I decided it was time to return to Paradise Valley to retrieve my belongings. With my mother still traveling and not expected back for another week, we had the perfect opportunity to enter the house legally, since I was still officially a resident, and collect my personal items without the drama of a confrontation. "You don't have to come if it would be too emotionally difficult," my father assured me as we planned the logistics. "I can handle everything with the legal team and movers." But I knew this was something I needed to do myself, a necessary step in closing this chapter of my life and reclaiming my sense of agency. "I want to go," I said firmly. "There are things there that belong to me, and I need to face this." The decision made, we began planning the retrieval mission with military precision. Flights were booked, legal documents prepared, and a professional moving company engaged to transport my belongings back to Boulder. As the date approached, I found myself drafting and redrafting a letter to leave for my mother, trying to find words that would express the depth of her betrayal while also claiming my own power and independence. 3 days before my mother was scheduled to return from the Maldives, my father and I, accompanied by Patricia and her paralegal assistant, arrived at Vincent's Paradise Valley mansion. Using the key I still carried, I opened the front door to find the house exactly as it had been left, eerily silent and undisturbed, like a museum of my former life. Walking into that space as essentially a visitor rather than a resident was deeply disorienting. Familiar surroundings suddenly felt foreign and unwelcoming, as if I was seeing them clearly for the first time. The photographs lining the hallways and covering side tables featured primarily Vincent and his children, with my mother occasionally included in group shots. I realized with a shock that there were virtually no images of me anywhere in the common areas, and absolutely none of me alone with my mother. "Where's your room?" my father asked quietly, his hand a reassuring presence on my shoulder. I led him upstairs to the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, the room farthest from the master suite and closest to the utility areas. Opening the door revealed my modest space, which looked even more austere and impersonal when compared to the elaborate bedrooms of Vincent's children that we had passed. "This was your room." My father's voice held a note of disbelief and barely contained anger as he took in the basic furnishings and complete lack of personal touches or decorative elements. "It's fine," I said automatically, the defensive response ingrained after years of being told I should be grateful for what I had. His expression softened with compassion. "No, sweetheart. It's not fine. You deserved so much better than this." With the help of the professional movers, we began the systematic process of packing my belongings. Clothes went into wardrobe boxes, books and school supplies into smaller containers. I was selective about what I chose to take, leaving behind anything that had been gifts from my mother or Vincent, taking only items that truly belonged to me or held genuine sentimental value. As I cleared out my desk drawers, I discovered a small wooden box of keepsakes I had almost forgotten, pushed to the very back of the bottom drawer. Inside were photographs from before the divorce, several birthday cards my father had managed to send during the early years after the separation, and a small stuffed tiger he had won for me at the Arizona State Fair when I was 6. "You kept these," he said, his voice thick with emotion as I showed him the mementos. "I never really believed she was telling the complete truth about you not caring," I admitted. "Not in my heart, anyway." In my closet, hidden behind a row of shoes in a showbox, I discovered something that made my blood run cold, a rubber band-bound stack of envelopes, all addressed to me in my father's unmistakable handwriting. With shaking hands, I opened the first one to find a birthday card for my 14th birthday, containing a heartfelt message and a gift card that had never been used. One by one, I opened the hidden envelopes, each one containing irrefutable evidence of my father's continued efforts to remain in my life, efforts my mother had deliberately and systematically concealed from me. Cards for every birthday and Christmas I had missed. A letter explaining his new address and phone number when he moved to Boulder. Photographs of him at his company's headquarters with a note saying he hoped I would visit someday. Even a graduation card for my completion of 8th grade, which meant he had been keeping track of my academic progress somehow. "She kept all of these from me," I whispered, tears streaming down my face as the full scope of her deception became clear. "All this time, I thought you had completely forgotten about me." My father pulled me into a fierce embrace. "Never. Not for a single day, not for a single moment." As the movers continued their methodical work, I wandered into my mother's home office, drawn by a need to understand the psychology behind her systematic campaign to separate me from my father. Patricia had advised that any personal documents related to me were legally mine to examine and take, so I began searching through the organized filing system. In a folder labeled Divorce, Final, I found financial records that confirmed everything my father had told me. Monthly child support payments substantially larger than what my mother had claimed were being deposited regularly into a separate account I had never known existed. There were also court documents showing my father's repeated petitions for expanded visitation rights, all opposed by my mother with increasingly creative and fabricated excuses. Most damning of all was a draft letter to her attorney, dated shortly after she met Vincent, outlining a strategy to minimize the biological father's influence and interference as she integrated successfully into the new family structure. I was referred to throughout the document as a complication that needs careful management to ensure Vincent's continued commitment to the relationship. Reading my mother's clinical description of me as an obstacle to her happiness rather than her cherished daughter was like being stabbed in the chest. But it also provided a clarity I had been seeking. This wasn't about anything I had done or failed to do. This was about her fundamental inability to love unconditionally. By late afternoon, the packing was complete and the movers were loading the last boxes into their truck. As they worked, I sat at my now empty desk and wrote the letter I had been composing mentally for days. Dear Mom, it began, the formality of mother feeling too distant, the warmth of mommy impossibly out of reach. I poured out years of accumulated hurt and anger, but also a hard-won understanding of her limitations and choices. I explained that I had found the hidden letters and financial records, that I knew the truth about her systematic campaign to keep my father away from me. I'm choosing to live with Dad now, I wrote near the end, not as revenge against you, but because I deserve to be somewhere I am genuinely wanted and valued. I hope someday you will understand the damage your choices have caused, not just to me, but to yourself as well. Despite everything, I don't hate you, but I need to love myself enough to leave. I placed the letter on the stripped mattress of what had been my bed, the white paper stark against the bare blue fitted sheet. As a final symbolic gesture, I left my house key beside it, a formal relinquishment of my place in this household and this version of family. Walking out of that mansion for the last time, I felt a complex mixture of grief, relief, and profound resolution. My father waited by the rental car, his expression carefully neutral but supportive. "All finished?" he asked gently. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat but feeling lighter with each step away from that house and that life. He seemed to understand my emotional state completely, opening the car door for me without further questions or attempts at conversation. As we drove away through the manicured streets of Paradise Valley, I didn't look back at Vincent's mansion. Instead, I looked forward through the windshield toward Boulder, toward the future I was now free to create on my own terms. My mother returned from the Maldives 4 days later. Within hours of her arrival, my phone began exploding with notifications, a barrage of increasingly frantic and manipulative messages. "Where are you? Why is your room completely empty? Call me immediately. Emma, this isn't funny. Come home right now. I just spoke to your father's lawyer. How could you betray me like this after everything I've sacrificed for you? Please come home, sweetheart. We can work this out together. I miss you terribly." The messages cycled predictably through anger, guilt-tripping, false contrition, and desperate bargaining, a manipulation playbook I now recognized clearly. I showed the messages to my father and Patricia, who advised me not to respond until the legal proceedings were further along and we had established firmer boundaries. A week after her return, my mother made the decision to show up unannounced at my father's Boulder home, having somehow obtained our address. The security system alerted us to her presence at the front gate, her luxury SUV visible on the monitoring screen as she repeatedly pressed the intercom button with increasing agitation. You don't have to see her if you're not ready, my father assured me as we watched her on the security monitor. We can have the system turn her away. But I knew this confrontation was inevitable and perhaps necessary for my own psychological healing. I'll talk to her, I said with more confidence than I felt, but I want you and Patricia here with me. My mother's expression when the front door opened was a fascinating study in conflicting emotions. Relief at finding me battling with outrage at the circumstances and setting. She wore an expensive designer outfit and oversized sunglasses, the very picture of affluent suburban perfection, but I could see the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. "Emma, thank God," she exclaimed, stepping forward as if to embrace me. I took an instinctive step back, and her arms dropped awkwardly to her sides. "What is going on here? Why did you leave Paradise Valley? Why are you with him?" The last word was infused with such venom that I actually flinched. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," my father suggested, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. Once we were seated in the living room, Patricia present as both legal counsel and neutral witness, my mother's carefully maintained composure began to deteriorate rapidly. Her eyes darted around the beautiful space, taking in the obvious wealth and impeccable taste evident in every detail of the home's design and furnishing. "So this is what this is really about," she said with a brittle, bitter laugh. "He's seduced you away with promises of luxury and privilege. I should have seen this coming." "That's not why I'm here," I replied, working hard to keep my voice steady and controlled. "I'm here because you abandoned me at Denver International Airport. I'm here because you've been systematically lying to me about Dad for years. I'm here because I found all the letters and cards you deliberately hid from me." Her expression faltered momentarily, then hardened into defensive anger. "You went through my private papers and personal belongings. How dare you violate my privacy like that?" "They were addressed to me," I countered firmly. "They were legally and morally mine to read. You had no right to keep them from me." "You are 16 years old," she snapped, her voice rising. "Everything under my roof belongs to me, including your correspondence. I was protecting you from his inconsistency and broken promises." My father, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke. "There were no broken promises, Karen. Only your systematic and deliberate efforts to erase me from our daughter's life. You have no right to judge my parenting decisions," she hissed, turning her fury on him. "You have no idea what it was like raising her alone while you were off building your empire and becoming a millionaire." "I sent substantial child support every month," he replied with calm precision. "Far more than the court had ordered. Money you apparently spent on yourself while telling Emma you were financially struggling and that I was an irresponsible deadbeat." My mother's face flushed red with embarrassment and caught out anger. "That's a complete lie. Including abandoning her at an airport so you could vacation with your new family." Patricia interjected, her professional tone making the accusation even more damning. For a moment, my mother seemed genuinely at a loss for words, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Then her eyes narrowed as she turned back to me with renewed desperation. "I did not abandon you, Emma. I gave you an opportunity to develop independence and self-reliance. If you had simply gone home as we discussed, none of this dramatic nonsense would have been necessary. The blatant rewriting of reality made my chest tight with righteous anger. You left me alone at an international airport with $200 and no way to get into the house. You didn't tell me to go home, you told me to figure it out. You didn't answer my phone calls or respond to my texts for hours. How exactly is that an opportunity rather than abandonment? You're twisting and exaggerating what actually happened, she insisted, though her voice had lost much of its conviction. My father leaned forward in his chair. Karen, we have security footage from the airport. We have detailed witness statements from airline personnel. We have the text messages you sent Emma afterwards trying to cover your tracks and rewrite history. The remaining color drained completely from my mother's face. You're building a legal case against me. You want to steal my daughter and destroy my reputation at the same time. This isn't about punishment or revenge, Patricia explained with professional patience. This is about establishing what serves Emma's best interests going forward. She has expressed a clear and informed preference to live with her father, and given the documented circumstances, any court would very likely honor that decision. My mother's carefully maintained composure finally crumbled entirely, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face as she turned to me with raw desperation. Emma, please. I made a mistake, a terrible, thoughtless mistake. But you can't abandon me for him. We're family. We've been through everything together. We stopped being a real family when you decided Vincent and his children were more important than me, I said quietly but firmly. Maybe even before that, when you started lying about Dad and hiding his attempts to stay in my life. It wasn't supposed to be like that, she protested weakly. Then what was it supposed to be like? I asked, genuinely curious to understand her reasoning. Help me understand why you would systematically hide Dad's letters, lie about child support, and then abandon me for a family vacation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, apparently unable to formulate a justification that even she could believe or articulate. Finally, in barely more than a whisper, she said, Vincent thought it would be better if you stayed home. He said the resort was designed for adults and children who were accustomed to that kind of luxury lifestyle. I was terrified of losing him and everything he represented. The raw, painful honesty was somehow more devastating than her earlier attempts at manipulation and gaslighting. So you chose him over me, I said, the words hanging in the air like an accusation. I chose financial security and social acceptance, she replied, the admission seeming to surprise even her. Do you have any idea what it's like to be a single mother with no money, no prospects, constantly worried about keeping a roof over your head? Vincent offered us a better life. He offered you a better life, I corrected gently. I was just excess baggage that came with the deal. Before she could formulate a response, the front door opened and Vincent himself strode into the room, his face tight with barely controlled anger and obvious annoyance. Karen, this has gone on quite long enough, he announced without preamble. Get in the car immediately. My father stood up immediately, his protective instincts clearly activated. How did you get past the security gate? Vincent ignored him completely, focusing his attention entirely on my mother with obvious displeasure. I told you explicitly not to come here. You're just making the legal situation worse for everyone involved. Our attorney specifically advised against any direct contact. My mother seemed to physically shrink under his disapproving gaze, her brief moment of honest vulnerability evaporating as she reverted to her familiar role as the compliant, obedient wife. I just wanted to see Emma and try to work things out, she said apologetically. And now you have, he replied dismissively, as if I weren't even present in the room. Let's go. Now. As my mother rose obediently to follow him, I called after her with sudden urgency. Is this really what you want, Mom? Someone who treats you like a misbehaving child and treats me like a disposable inconvenience. She paused in the doorway, genuine conflict evident in her expression and body language, but Vincent took her elbow with unmistakable firmness. The car, Karen. Immediately. The last image I had of my mother that day was her back as she walked away from me yet again, just as it had been at the airport. But this time, I was not the one being left behind or abandoned. This time, I was choosing to stay exactly where I belonged. In the immediate aftermath of that surreal confrontation, my father's legal team filed for a restraining order after Vincent had attempted to bypass our security system. The following day, the court granted a temporary protective order and established a formal custody arrangement pending a full hearing. The most difficult part of this entire process was finally accepting that my mother had chosen her new life over me, not just once at the airport, but repeatedly over the years with each hidden letter, each lie about my father's involvement, each decision to prioritize Vincent's comfort over my emotional well-being. The little girl who had once believed she was the center of her mother's universe had to confront the painful but liberating reality that she had been, at best, an afterthought in her mother's pursuit of financial security and social status. The months following my mother's dramatic visit to Boulder were challenging but ultimately transformative. Adjusting to life with my father involved creating entirely new routines, establishing healthy boundaries, and learning to trust that his presence and love were permanent fixtures rather than temporary circumstances. I began seeing Dr. Sarah Chen for weekly therapy sessions, which provided a safe, neutral space to process the complex layers of abandonment trauma and years of psychological manipulation I had endured. What you're experiencing is completely normal and healthy, Dr. Chen assured me during one particularly difficult session where I had broken down completely. Anger, grief, relief, guilt, hope, they can all coexist simultaneously. Healing from this kind of family trauma isn't a linear process. With her professional guidance, I gradually began to understand that my mother's choices and limitations reflected her own psychological brokenness rather than any deficiency in my worth or lovability. This realization didn't excuse or minimize what she had done, but it helped me carry the emotional burden with less self-blame and toxic shame. People who are emotionally healthy and whole don't abandon their children, Dr. Chen explained during another session. Your mother's choices speak volumes about her own damage and limitations, not about your value as a person. My father enrolled me at Boulder Preparatory Academy for my junior year, and the transition was both exciting and intimidating. After years of being the perpetual outsider in Vincent's household and social circle, I was naturally wary of forming new connections or trusting potential friendships. To my amazement, I found myself gradually making genuine friendships for the first time in years. Maya and Sophie, twins who shared my passion for environmental science, welcomed me into their friend group with an ease that felt almost suspicious at first. James, a talented musician who recognized my tentative interest in learning guitar, offered to give me lessons during lunch periods. Slowly but surely, I began to lower my defensive walls and allow these new friends to see glimpses of my authentic self. "You seem different than when you first arrived here," Maya commented one afternoon as we walked home from school together. "More relaxed and open, somehow." "I guess I'm learning that not everyone has hidden agendas or ulterior motives," I replied, the insight surprising even me with its optimism. Building a genuine relationship with my father was a delicate dance of rediscovery and mutual healing. We were simultaneously getting to know each other as we existed now while also reconciling and integrating memories of who we had been before the divorce separated us. Sometimes the past and present aligned perfectly, like when he remembered my childhood fascination with astronomy and installed a professional-grade telescope on the deck for stargazing. Other times, the years of enforced separation created unexpected gaps and moments of disconnect that reminded us both of everything we had missed. "I wish I had been there for your first day of high school," he said one evening as we looked through the few photographs I had brought from Paradise Valley. "Your science fair projects, your first heartbreak, all those milestone moments. We can't recover those lost years," I told him, finding myself in the unexpected position of comforting him. "But we have right now, and we have the future stretching ahead of us." He squeezed my hand, his eyes suspiciously bright with unshed tears. "When did you become so wise and mature?" "Trauma and abandonment have their educational benefits," I replied with dark humor, a sign of my gradual psychological healing and resilience. 6 months after I moved to Boulder, the family court granted my father full legal custody of me. My mother, represented by an expensive attorney Vincent had hired, initially fought the decision with typical dramatic flair, but eventually agreed to the custody transfer after Patricia presented overwhelming evidence of abandonment and systematic financial misconduct. The judge ordered my mother to repay the misappropriated child support funds and established a highly structured visitation schedule that would only commence after I completed a minimum number of joint therapy sessions with her. More consideration and opportunity than she deserved, in my personal opinion. You can maintain appropriate anger about what she did while still leaving the door open for some kind of relationship, my father gently reminded me. But the choice of whether and how to engage with her is completely yours to make. I'll support whatever decision feels right to you. I agreed to attempt the joint therapy sessions, though the first few meetings were absolutely excruciating. My mother oscillated unpredictably between tearful, dramatic apologies and subtle attempts to justify or minimize her actions. Her preferred narrative had shifted from outright denying the abandonment to framing it as a misguided attempt to please Vincent, as if that somehow made her choices less damaging or traumatic. "I just wanted to secure our financial future," she repeated like a mantra during multiple sessions. I was terrified of ending up alone and broke again. So instead you made sure I ended up alone at an airport, I responded during one particularly tense exchange. Over time and with Dr. Chen's skilled facilitation, I was able to establish firm, non-negotiable boundaries with my mother. I would not return to live with her regardless of promises, emotional appeals, or guilt trips. I would not pretend our history of dysfunction and betrayal had never happened. I would not allow her to rewrite our shared narrative to ease her guilt or maintain her self-image as a devoted mother. These terms were absolute and non-negotiable, and slowly she seemed to accept the new reality of our relationship. Throughout this entire process, my father remained remarkably neutral and restrained, never speaking ill of my mother despite everything she had done to both of us. When I asked him about this seemingly superhuman level of forgiveness, his response has stayed with me ever since. Hating her would only poison your own heart and future, he explained with quiet wisdom. You are half her DNA whether we like it or not, and you carry some of her positive qualities as well as mine. Besides, whatever her faults and failures, she gave me you, and for that gift, I can forgive almost anything. The first holiday season with my father and his extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely remembered from early childhood, was a revelation. The genuine warmth, inclusion, and unconditional acceptance I experienced stood in stark contrast to the performative, tension-filled family dinners at Vincent house, where I had always felt like an unwelcome intruder. My paternal grandmother, a vibrant woman in her mid-70s, pulled me aside during Christmas dinner for a private conversation that moved me to tears. You have your father's resilience and strength, she told me, her eyes crinkling with genuine affection, and his generous heart. But that spark of independence, that fire when you talk about things that matter to you, that's uniquely your own, sweetheart. High school graduation arrived 3 years later, and my father was practically glowing with pride as I delivered the valedictorian address to my graduating class. My mother attended the ceremony, sitting awkwardly several rows behind my father and his parents. Our relationship had evolved into something cordial if not particularly close, built on careful honesty rather than the false harmony she would have preferred. College took me to the East Coast, where I pursued a double major in psychology and pre-law at Georgetown University. The physical distance from both parents allowed me to define myself beyond the complicated dynamics of their divorce and the drama of my adolescent years. I discovered passions, strengths, and aspects of my personality that might never have emerged if my life had continued on its previous trajectory. During my junior year, I began interning with a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting children navigating parental divorce and custody disputes. This volunteer work eventually led to my chosen career path, developing improved protocols for family courts to better consider and protect children's emotional needs during custody proceedings. The journey toward genuine forgiveness was long, non-linear, and sometimes frustrating. Some days, the memory of my mother's casual shrug as she abandoned me at the airport still had the power to steal my breath and ruin my mood. Other days, I could acknowledge her humanity, her psychological limitations, and her own traumatic history with genuine compassion rather than bitterness or anger. Forgiveness doesn't mean what happened was acceptable or okay, Dr. Chen had explained during one of our sessions. It means you're choosing not to let someone else's dysfunction and poor choices consume your own future happiness. On my 25th birthday, I wrote my mother a letter expressing this hard-won understanding and emotional maturity. I've learned that people can only give what they have within themselves to offer, I wrote. Your capacity for unconditional love was damaged long before I came along, probably by your own childhood experiences. Recognizing this psychological reality has freed me from expecting what you were never capable of providing. Her response was surprisingly self-aware and emotionally honest. You deserved so much better than what I was able to be as a mother, she wrote back. I think about that failure every day, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused you during those crucial years. When I married at 28, my father walked me down the aisle with tears of joy and pride streaming down his face. From the moment you called me from that airport, scared and abandoned, all I wanted was to see you happy, confident, and whole, he whispered before placing my hand in my soon-to-be husband's. Look at you now, stronger than I ever imagined possible. My mother attended the wedding with her new partner, Vincent, having long since moved on to his next trophy wife after their inevitable divorce 3 years earlier. She participated appropriately in the ceremony but without attempting to claim credit for the woman I had become, a restraint that reflected her own gradual growth and self-awareness over the intervening years. As I built my own family, I carried forward the profound lessons I had learned from both parents, a comprehensive roadmap of what to emulate and what to avoid at all costs. From my father, I learned the patient persistence of unconditional love and the courage required to begin again after devastating loss. From my mother's negative example, I learned the critical importance of emotional self-sufficiency and the genuine dangers of placing social status and financial security above authentic human connection. The airport abandonment that once defined my entire sense of self gradually became just one chapter in a much longer, more complex story. A pivotal and transformative moment certainly, but definitely not the conclusion or final word on my worth as a person. In an unexpected and paradoxical way, being left behind had ultimately propelled me forward, forcing me to discover inner strengths and resilience I might otherwise never have recognized or developed. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my mother had taken me to the Maldives that day. If she had chosen me over Vincent's preferences and comfort, would I still be caught in the destructive cycle of seeking her conditional approval and validation? Would I have ever discovered my father's unwavering, unconditional love? Would I have found my authentic voice and life purpose? These questions have no definitive answers, of course. Life offers no parallel versions or alternative timelines to compare with the path we actually walk. All I know with absolute certainty is that families are defined not by biology or legal documents, but by the consistent daily choice to show up, to value each other, to prioritize one another's well-being above personal convenience. My father taught me that fundamental truth through his actions. My mother, through her absence and abandonment, confirmed it in the most painful way possible. If you've ever felt abandoned, betrayed, or rejected by someone who should have protected and cherished you, I want you to know that your worth was never determined by their failure to see it. Their limitations, their damage, their inability to love unconditionally, none of that defines your value or determines your destiny. Family can be found and created in the most unexpected places if you remain open to authentic connection even after experiencing devastating heartbreak. Thank you for listening to my story and staying with me through this emotional journey. If it resonated with you in any meaningful way, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more reflections on resilience, healing, and the complicated dynamics of family relationships. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that abandonment shapes us but never defines our ultimate worth or potential. Have you ever had to establish firm boundaries with family members who hurt you? I'd love to hear about your experiences and insights in the comments below. Remember, your story matters. You are stronger than you know, and you are never as alone as you might feel in your darkest moments.